Are you tired of the cookie-cutter approach to education that's stuck in the last century? Are you seeking a win-win situation where your family thrives, your kid's education is revolutionary, and you still get to chase your own dreams? Welcome to Unschooled Unleashed. Unlock your child's genius. I'm your host, Matthew Jarecki, an unapologetic rebel dad and promoter of what many consider to be educational anarchy. You know the world isn't going to be won by those that just toe the line. It's the innovators, the visionaries, and the resilient spirits that are going to thrive. Our mission here is to forge those world changers within our very homes with less stress, energy, and time. Unschooled Unleashed starts now. Welcome back to another fantastic episode of Unschooled Unleashed. Today we're going to talk about helping kids accept responsibility for their actions. Very difficult to teach, but I believe it's something very important to teach. I go into it a little bit in the episode, but we've had some craziness in our household where people are going to have to accept responsibility for their actions, and consequences are steep. So I thought I'd do an episode to help myself get clear on exactly the direction that I want to move, and as well help you and pass on some of the lessons that I've learned. Before we do that, though, I do want to say we've passed this is weeks ago, if not over a month or more, 4,000 downloads. We've had a huge spike in new listeners and downloads in the podcast. And I want to thank you, because I know some of you have told other people. That's the only way this, I think, grows at this point, is you're telling other people about this podcast. You're leaving a rating or a review, and I really appreciate that. My whole goal with this podcast is literally just to sometimes organize my thoughts and get straight on my direction. I have to live by example. If I'm talking about it, I have to live by example. I have to admit my mistakes. And I want to help others that are just a step behind. Or maybe even a bigger portion of it is leave my legacy for my kids in the direction I want to go. I'm going to miss this mark. I don't do everything I say in this podcast, but I strive to do everything that I say in this podcast. I also want to pass on lessons. And this is just going to be an archive of where I made mistakes as a parent. And maybe one day my children will go back and listen to some of the stuff when they have kids the same age, or they're having problems in the same area, and they get to hear maybe my direction. And maybe it makes sense on why I did things the way I did. And maybe it helps provide clarity one day on why I handled myself the way I did, or maybe some of the struggles that I had, and maybe they can do better than me. And maybe that's the same for you and your children, and they can understand why you did what you did by you telling them, here was my direction, here's where I'm going with this. Maybe they hear you listening to some of this stuff, and they hear that you're really aiming for a higher way to do things, a better way to do things. That you do make mistakes, but you are aiming high. You wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you didn't care, and if you didn't want to strive for more. And I really do appreciate you. I really do appreciate you. I hope we're making an impact in not just your lives, not just your kids' lives, but the people around you and your community and your country. And man, I really do believe that there are some life-changing things that can happen within, but it starts within the family. And accepting responsibility in your household is where it starts. And that's what we want to do, is raise kids who accept responsibility. So I think this episode's particularly important to me. But I won't belabor it anymore. I just wanted to make sure I thank you, and I'll stop there. So with that, let's dive in. Today we're talking about helping kids accept responsibility for their actions. Guiding kids to take ownership of their actions, I believe, helps them grow into responsible and resilient adults. I think this is very important. Today we're going to explore how to nurture accountability in a way that fosters confidence and self-awareness, two things that I think are very important if you're going to make decisions in life. I believe responsibility is a foundational skill. It's one of those meta skills that I like to reference. A skill that builds trust, independence, emotional intelligence to varying degrees, right? Just depending on how much responsibility we're willing to accept in each one of those areas. I think that it can affect anything in your life. If you apply this professionally, accepting responsibility professionally can shape the outcome, and you will make different decisions. You can make mistakes, and then you can learn from them. But helping kids embrace accountability requires a lot from the parent. But it's worth it. I think that from the parent, it's going to require some things that we are short on, like patience, empathy. We're going to have to be very intentional. And that's very difficult in a busy season, especially when you have younger children. You know, we got basketball season coming up, and that's just killer for us. So is baseball season, because you got all these games, all these practices. I got 3 kids who are going to be playing basketball this winter, and it's going to be really difficult. Game day, we spent all day watching games. You know, it's a lot. We're going to be going through a very busy season, as I'm sure all of you are currently in or about to go through. But we still have to be intentional during this time. And today we're going to uncover practical ways to teach responsibility while building your children's confidence. And hopefully it's going to be done in a way that makes it a little bit easier for you during this busy season. So let's talk about why responsibility matters first. I referenced some of it, but responsibility helps kids understand how their actions affect themselves and others around them. I think it fosters trust, independence, self-discipline, preparing kids for success in adulthood. Again, whether it's professionally or just in their regular life. Accepting responsibility is incredibly important because it strengthens relationships and it teaches kids empathy and accountability. Again, it doesn't matter where you apply this, it's a meta skill. If you take responsibility for the things you can control or influence, that might be the one deciding factor that helps an outcome shift towards you, what you would desire, or something better for you and the people around you, or for the worse of everyone around you. People who take no responsibility for anything often find themselves as victims, and I strongly discourage the victim mindset in this house. I struggle with it myself, which is why I focus on it a lot in this house, that we aren't victims, that we can influence or actually control certain parts of our lives. I can control me, and that's it. I can influence situations, but I, again, can't control everything. And most things that are in my life, I actually can't control. But a small percentage I can. I like to use the example, and it's an absolute silly example, but the absurdity is actually the point. If a car comes flying off the road onto the sidewalk that you're walking on, can you accept any responsibility for that? And when I ask this individually to my children, they say no, there's nothing you can do about that. And they're right. There's nothing you can do about a car flying off the road and hitting you if you're standing there. But we can accept some responsibility, as absurd as it sounds. 99.9999999% of the responsibility is out of your control. But there are some things that we can do differently. Like if we say we're going to learn from our mistakes. I got hit by a car. A car flew off the road onto the sidewalk. The things I can change. 1, I don't have to walk during busy times when there's a lot of traffic. That might just shift it. That can just, it might not avoid getting hit, but it's something I can do. I may not walk down the busy roads. I may choose to walk in a park instead. I may choose to be a little bit more intentional about my surroundings. Maybe I won't wear headphones so I can actually hear something. See how these little things might actually make a difference? Again, almost all of it is out of our control. But these little things that we can do, that accepting responsibility for those little small things helps us activate our brain on to start thinking about how we can play the Plinko game of life. If some of you aren't familiar with Plinko, I often think of life as a Plinko game. There's a show in the United States called The Price is Right. And in The Price is Right, they have this game called Plinko. I encourage you to look it up if you're not familiar with it. But essentially what they do is they have a little, I don't know if it's a ball or maybe like it looks like a big coin, but they drop it from the top and it randomly bounces around all the way to the bottom. Gravity takes this thing all the way to the bottom and it falls into a slot at the very bottom. In the very center is the big prize. And then there's various prizes to the left or right of that slot, of the slots, or of this big prize slot. Each of these are individual slots. And you could win nothing or you could win something huge. And you don't have much control over where that thing falls because it becomes so random. However, you can influence it. And you could drop it to the left or to the right. Over time, and this is just my anecdotal experience, even though you can't control the outcome of something, you can influence and you can control your actions, and that's it. Again, 99.9% of the time, you don't have any control over a lot of this stuff. But I can drop the Plinko chip over and over and over and over and over again, learning lessons and finding out that maybe if I drop it here, I have a little bit of a better chance, and over here, I have a little worse chance. Because you can choose anywhere you want to drop it from the top. That's how I think of life. And what I want to do is accept responsibility for my actions. I want to find where I can accept responsibility, learn from that, and apply it to the next situation. So try and learn any meta skill I can, and then apply it. Try and learn any small lessons I can with that individual situation and apply it. And then put it on repeat, make it a good habit, and move on. Again, this is accepting full responsibility for our lives. Again, I can't control most of what goes on around me. But I can focus in on the things I can control, or at least even possibly influence. And I like to differentiate those two, and I guess I should do that for those of you who aren't familiar with this concept. But there are only three categories of things that happen, right? There's things I can't control, there's things I can control, and there's things I can influence, and that's it. Nothing else. I'm only going to focus on the things I can control, and then I'm going to recognize the things I can influence. I'm not going to focus on the things I can't control because that's what breeds, for me, a victim mindset. And a victim mindset makes me not take action, makes me blame others, makes me resentful, it makes me angry. So I even when that car flies up and hits me, I go, what can I learn from this? What did I do that made this situation more likely to happen to me? That car flew off the street and it hit me. I was wearing headphones and I could not hear anything. Bad move, right? These little things. And then I can avoid that situation and maybe even apply it to other situations. Like if I'm walking down a dark alley, I probably don't want to be wearing headphones because I can't hear anything. And I don't know if anyone's behind me sneaking up on me. See how I can learn from these things and then apply them elsewhere. These are the kinds of things that I want to encourage with my children to learn. Moving on. What do we need to do to encourage this responsibility in our children? So one, we got to build a safe and supportive foundation. Kids are more likely to own up to their mistakes when they feel safe from judgment. Easier said than done though, right? I know I fail at this every day. I mean, the mistakes that I make are glaring. And you'd think a guy who has a podcast, maybe talking about this stuff and giving, at the very best you could call advice. I try and just give my story and what's worked for me. You'd think I'd have it more together, but I don't. I fail my kids every day, probably on the hour. But, I'm focusing on getting better and changing and holding myself accountable. So that's what I do. We need to make a safe and supportive foundation for our children. And that requires encouraging language. Sometimes I find myself just beating them down. And it's like, why would you do that? Why did you do that? Now look what you've done. That's not the focus. That's not where we should go, even though that's our reaction sometimes. We should instead ask questions, what can we learn from this? What do you learn? What did you learn from this? What can you do differently? Why did you do that? What lie are you believing that made you react that way? What habit did you form to make you do that? What perception of the world is wrong that you have that makes you think that, react that way? All these questions are probably the most supportive way to do it that are non-judgmental. At least that's what I find. We need to normalize mistakes. And this starts with modeling it in ourselves. We have to actually show that we make mistakes too. And I hope I actually showed that I make mistakes all the time. Broadcasting that out to the world. I try and take the same approach with my kids. I show that taking responsibility does not diminish my worth, but instead highlights my character. That I can go over and do something absolutely moronic or whatever, and then say, you know what, I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry for the way I handled myself, and I hope you can forgive me. We all make mistakes. I'm working on this, These are the kinds of things that I think provide that safe environment. There needs to be that trust in order to make those mistakes. They can't feel like they're going to be judged constantly. Moving on, encourage empathy first. Help kids see how their actions impact others. You can do this by maybe asking more questions, like, how do you think your brother felt when that happened? How would you feel if someone were to do that to you? That's, I find myself often arguing with my children because they say, oh, no, this is okay. Like, stealing from my brother is okay. And I say, oh, okay. Well, why don't we, if you think that's okay, we're not going to apply different rules to different people in the house. What we're going to do is change the rules for everyone. So you want the household rules to be we can take from each other and not asking. We could just take whatever we want from each other. We can go into each other's stuff, or each other's boxes and each other's beds and each other's whatever, backpacks, and take what we want, and that's the rules you want. So you're asking to change the rules for everyone. No, I just want the rules for me. No, that's not how that's going to work. We're not making special rules for each person. We're making rules for the household, and I'm the one who enforces that. So I hear you asking to change the rules so everyone can take from everyone. And that includes you. They back down, right? It builds empathy. Oh man, I wouldn't want that. Now, empathy is harder to cultivate. At least I find it is. But trying to reverse the roles, I find, fosters that empathy in a more natural way. They take a little bit more accountability for their actions, even when they're arguing something silly on the other end. I often have my children express how it affected them when they are the, quote unquote victim of someone doing something wrong. I think that is really important to build that empathy. And I think the empathy is, I think that cultivating empathy is very important. It's something I struggle with, believe it or not. I have I have too much empathy in the grand scheme of things. Like, I care about society or my community and, these larger groups than an individual, which is really odd because I can say, even though I do care about the individual, it's a weird dynamic that I won't get into. I definitely have empathy for individuals, but it seems to magnify once I go over and look at a larger scale. That's how I should say this. I I think there's some benefit to that, but I also want to cultivate, I wish I had a little bit more empathy for an individual, because I often find myself very rigid and a little bit cold when looking at an individual. Now, I do have empathy for them. I just seem to look at a community and have much more empathy for a community than I do just the individual, which I think is actually a fault of mine in many ways. So I really do try and strive for more empathy, and especially with my children. I'm not really good at it, so it's hard to teach it. But I think that empathy is a skill absolutely worth mastering, so I strive to learn. And I want my kids to learn too, so I often find these questions kind of help. Moving on, I like to use natural consequences as teaching opportunities. I don't like to punish, although we are open to punishing, grounding. We do that, not routinely, but we do it. Natural consequences help kids connect their actions to outcomes without the added punishment. For example, if they want to go outside and we're traveling to the store, as long as I'm not putting them in harm's way, they choose not to wear a jacket, I let them feel the cold. They sure listen to me next time I say put on a jacket. If they, you can apply this in many different ways. That's a good example. I'll stop there. But these natural consequences are not about blame. They're about allowing life to be the teacher. And I think that's one of the things we as unschoolers like to do is allow life to be the teacher. Life will provide the necessary lessons if you allow your mind to open and hear those lessons and learn from those lessons. Moving on. Before I move on from that, I want to also differentiate for those of you who are new to the podcast, the difference between what I call natural consequences and punishments. Natural consequences are, again, with the jacket, you experience, if you forget your jacket, you experience the cold. That's a natural consequence. What a punishment would be, according to my Matt's dictionary, would be, oh, you forgot your jacket. Now I'm going to take away video games. Probably not the best example. Maybe I provide them with a blanket in the car that we got, and then I say you're going to lose video games. It's very disconnected, and that's the point I'm trying to make. Is natural consequences have this natural connection to the actions that the children are making, whereas punishments are very disconnected. Oh, you talked back? Well, now you don't get to play video games. See how that works? It's just so disconnected. Whereas they talk back, well, now I'm going to remove myself from the situation. They are either going to go to the room, sit at the table, or do something, but they're not going to interact with other people because they can't control their mouth. And I'm not going to allow this to continue where they're hurting other people. And we're not going to have chaos in this household. So they're either going to go in the room, chill out, go to the table, sit down, no talking, or they're not going to be able to play with their siblings or be in the same room with their siblings. This is as close as I can get to the natural consequences. It's hard to mimic the actual natural consequences at times as well. For example, if you go over and steal from everyone around you, no one's going to want to be around you. And that's hard to mimic. But what I do is I often remove them from the situation and say, people who do this are lonely. People don't want to interact with them. And I try and tie that as much as I can to the actual consequence that comes out, which is I can't interact with others. I can't play with others because no one's going to want to be around you if you continue this behavior. And I try and affirm that lesson. Moving on. Teach problem solving instead of focusing on mistakes. This is easier said than done as well. Responsibility isn't just about admitting fault. It's about taking action to make things right. So what we do is we walk kids through the steps. They first acknowledge what they did. They accept responsibility for it, right? They say, yes, I did that and it was wrong. I am sorry. I did not want to hurt you. I'm sorry I took that. I'm going to repay you, whatever it might be. They try and make it right. They apologize. Then they act to fix the problem. I'm going to repay you. I'm going to give you, I'm going to give it back. I'm going to, whatever they need to do to make it right. We reinforce this over and over and over again. Our kids act like every time they have no idea what it is. But we allow them to feel the weight of that. If they don't know what it is, we say, well, you can think about it. We've talked about this about 400 times. So go back and revisit one of those conversations. And then go ahead and we'll let you try again. Oftentimes, if there's a period to allow them to settle down and they have a more calm demeanor, they often come up with what they need to do. And again, we don't force any of this. We just say, well, if this is how you want to handle yourself and this is how you want to be known by, that is going to have consequences as well. And we go through that. But oftentimes they want to do the right thing. I mean, once they get their head on straight, they go, yeah, I don't want to hurt other people. I don't feel good about myself when they do that. And we try and focus on the solutions and not blame. Way easier said than done. Oftentimes I find myself blaming them for a situation and I just beat it into them. And it's like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? We need to focus on the solution. We want a harmonious household. We want a grace and love-based household. That means we don't steal from each other. It means we tell the truth. We do all these things that provide a cohesive way to exist with each other. That's the solution. Which environment do you want to live in? That's what I ask them. And they'll usually choose, once their head's on straight, yeah, we should tell the truth. Yeah, we should not take from each other and all this stuff. The solution is, we're aiming for something that's higher, not focusing on every little thing we did wrong within the situation. Again, way easier said than done, especially when you're trying to teach lessons along the way about some of the mistakes they made. Moving on, we try and foster responsibility through daily opportunities. So responsibility is a skill that grows through practice. So we create age-appropriate tasks along the way. So for example, our younger child, I should say, who's 6 years old, she is responsible for feeding the dog. Now we, of course, check on this, but she is able to get a scoop of food out, put it in the bowl. We have a very small dog, so one scoop does it. And if she forgets to feed the dog, she empathizes a lot with that dog. Oh my gosh, I forgot to feed my doggy. We don't put judgment on it. We just say, oh, your doggy's going to be hungry. You got to make sure you're taking care of the dog. That's one of the reasons we got our dog, is to foster responsibility. It's a daily opportunity. The older kids, well, they go out and they take that dog out. They have to get the dog out. They take turns getting the dog out. And if the dog goes in the house, or they forget to set their timer, or the dog starts making cues that it has to go out, we just say, that dog hasn't gone out in this long. Can you imagine having to hold your peeing and not being able to go when you need to go and not being able to communicate it? And that also builds empathy as well. And they tend to take responsibility for that. We also allow them to feel for example, the weight of not doing enough chores to earn money. We have daily chores that they just do as a part of their household responsibilities, but then they can earn extra money by doing things like sweeping the steps, taking the trash out, taking the trash bins out, and the recycle bin out, and the what else? I mean, they can do. I don't know. We have a list on our fridge of different things they can do: dusting, vacuuming. Well, vacuuming is a daily responsibility. Anyways, we have things that they can do to make money. We keep reminding them and saying, using our words, saying, "Hey, Christmas is coming. You're gonna have to earn some money in order to buy gifts." And we warned our older ones last year that we're not going to help out with the gifts next year. As far as money, you're going to be able to buy what you can afford. And that got them moving a little bit. Then they backed off. Then they moved a little bit, backed off, moved a little bit, and they just kept on doing that. They got just enough money. But they were really bummed when they got to the store and found that things cost more than they did last year. And they don't have as much to be able to buy. They didn't even know how much they had. They just kind of did what they wanted to do. And this teaches responsibility. This teaches, hey, maybe I should do more next time. Maybe I should plan for the future. That's responsibility. And those are the kind of daily actions that we take. I think that gradually increasing responsibilities as they grow into more capable beings is wise. So we do that. We give them more responsibility as time goes on. We also give them a little bit more freedom, a little bit more ability to do things, and that freedom will go away if they can't take responsibility for it. So it's a balance. And I'm not perfect at it by any means, but that's kind of how we do things right now. We teach the power of apologies as well. That's taking responsibility. You're finding where you went wrong. Now, oftentimes, if there's an interaction, neither party's completely innocent. Of course, sometimes it's that way, but we try and we focus in on taking responsibility for your part in this poor interaction, let's say. Sincere apologies are a key part of responsibility, I believe. Teach kids to focus on the other person's feelings and making an amends. Example phrases, I'm sorry that I took whatever, if they took something. How can I fix this? Those kinds of things, asking those questions, I think is a good thing. Practicing apologies builds emotional intelligence, and I think it also builds accountability. We have shifted a lot of how we interact with our children during a poor interaction between the two kids. Let's say they're fighting and they're doing something, one kid did something that the other kid didn't like. They took something again. We'll just keep running with that example. When one kid comes to me and says, they did this, I say the first thing I ask is, did you talk with them? I don't want to hear about it unless you talked with them. Unless it's an emergency, of course, right? I say, no, I didn't talk with them. I say, go back and talk with them. And that's all I say. And they say, okay. They walk over and they talk with them. All right. It's not solved, let's say. Most times it gets solved with that. But then I call them both over. And I say, okay, what happened? And what I mean by that, and they've learned this, because I don't let them talk about the other person. I say, all right, what happened? They go through, each one has a turn to talk, and they only focus on what they did. That's it. Each one had a chance to talk, focus on what they did, and then I ask them individually, is that accurate about what the other person did? Do they tell the whole story? Oftentimes, and this is actually pretty surprising to me, the answer is yes. They took it seriously, and then the problem's solved, and then they literally apologize. All I did was teach them to accept responsibility for their actions, voice it, and then the apologies start flowing, and then they get along. It's kind of crazy. This is a more recent thing that I've done, at least been consistent with, and seems to be working. So I think that method, paired with the apology, of course, helps them take a lot of responsibility. Moving on, celebrate effort and progress, okay? Acknowledge when your kids take responsibility, even for small things. This is hard for me to recognize because I tend to say, in my own head, you shouldn't congratulate yourself for doing your job, right? That's just expected. You don't get a trophy for showing up to work every day. That's just not how the world works, or taking the trash out, or whatever it might be, in my own head, in my own life, right? However, I don't think that's a good way to look at the world. I have tried to refocus my energy on celebrating everything that I've done. If I got out of bed and that was the best I could do today, I celebrate I actually got out of bed because I didn't have to do that. Celebrate effort and progress, okay? Acknowledge when your kid takes responsibility. Focus on the effort and growth rather than demanding perfection. Do not compare them to other people, compare them to their previous self, because that's the mindset that we want. That's what I try and do. I try not to look around and say, oh, look at this person, look at this person. Look how great they are and how poor I am. It's the whole thing on social media. We're constantly comparing ourselves to others and we get depressed and we feel like failures. No, compare to your previous self. And that's the only comparison that should be taking place. And then celebrate if there's any growth. Celebrate the effort. If you weren't able to do it, at least you tried, right? Celebrate the effort and progress and model that for them. And then, help them think that way by framing it that way, just by the way you speak. I'm proud of how you cleaned up your toys without being asked. That is incredible. And that's the kind of stuff that makes me want to give you more freedom to be able to do what you want. I actually say this to my kids. Like, they pick up all their stuff in the evening and they vacuum and they do all this stuff, all their chores, whatever they're supposed to do. And they come up to me and they ask, because they're allowed to play video games a certain number of times within the week in the evening. They say, hey, can we play video games? I don't even ask if they cleaned up. I just say, yeah, if you want to do it tonight, go ahead. We got nothing planned. But if they don't clean up, if they leave a whole bunch of stuff out and I walk out and they're playing video games after they ask and I see all this stuff, I go, shut off the video games, clean up. And then the next time they ask me, if I'm in the middle of something, I don't drop everything and just check the house. I say, you're going to have to wait until I'm done with this. You didn't pick up last time. We don't have that kind of trust, and I need to check around the house. That natural consequence encourages responsibility. They actually take it seriously next time. And then when they actually start doing it, we celebrate. We celebrate that they did it and say, yeah, you've been cleaning up this. It looks great. I don't think we need to do this anymore. Like, you get more freedom. You can just come up to me and ask. We have that trust that the house is cleaned. Go ahead and do it. Have fun, right? Moving on, then we'll talk about, this is the last topic. Reframe responsibility as empowerment, right? And I kind of alluded to this in the last portion, but help kids see responsibility as a strength and a way to take control of their lives. Frame it positively. You have the power to make things better instead of you need to fix this. Empower kids to take pride in owning their actions and decisions. Life can be better. If you clean up everything and make sure you accept responsibility for that, you get to play video games right away when you ask. That's empowering. That's freedom. That is a strength. If you handle your business, you have a lot more opportunity. And I think that allowing them to build that habit and that frame of mind is incredibly beneficial. So, actionable tips for you guys. Model responsibility. Admit your own mistakes. Show you can take ownership. Use encouraging language. Shift from blame to growth by focusing on what can be learned. Create responsibility-rich experiences. Gradually give your kids control over tasks that matter to them. They have to actually matter to them. They actually have to take responsibility for it, right? And that's part of your job, is framing it in that way. And then allowing consequences if things fall through the cracks, but eventually they're going to get there. They're going to make a lot of mistakes. Again, use encouraging language. Celebrate the wins. Celebrate it with them. Do whatever you need to do. This builds their confidence. They actually can do this. Reflect together. After a mistake, ask reflective questions, help them learn and grow. And you can even talk about lessons. We didn't go much into this, but you can use stories about, from your own personal life about how when you took responsibility for something, it really changed your life. And they can learn from those generational lessons that you can now pass on. I still remember some of the lessons my grandfather did because my parents passed it down to me, who he passed down to them. And it's crazy. Anyways, in conclusion, helping kids accept responsibility isn't just about fixing mistakes. It's about fostering growth, confidence, and independence. With patience, empathy, and a focus on solutions, we can guide our kids to see accountability as a tool for success, and that's what we want. Let's create a home environment where mistakes are safe to admit and responsibility is celebrated in a sign of strength. So with that, I'll end today's episode. So stay curious, stay unschooled, and stay away from algebra nightmares. I'll catch you in the next episode. So here's where we roll up our sleeves and bring out the big guns. If you support our mission, then please leave a review. On Unschooled Unleashed, we are talking about using a radical approach to education in today's world, and the more 5-star reviews we have, the more people will feel comfortable with the ideas, strategies, and principles we discuss. It gives legitimacy to our message, and the podcast's algorithm prioritizes us so we can reach more people. You may even have your 5-star review read on our podcast. Before I let you go, I have to pause and say this from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. Your presence here is the fuel that ignites this movement. I am incredibly moved that you trust in us enough to click play. You, my friends, are the caped heroes in this story, the guardians of your family's learning journey, and a beacon of hope for your community. Be bold. Do what you think is best for you and your family. Thanks again for tuning in and taking this courageous leap outside of the box for this educational revolution. Welcome to the front line.